By now you probably already know what Shovel Knight is, but in case you don't, Shovel Knight, it's an alright game. I mean, it wasn't a horrible game, but it had a lot of problems that really held it back from what it could have been. But with the harsh criticism behind them, the developers at Yacht Club made a new game for the Shovel Knight franchise, this time called Shovel Knight Plague of Shadows. But should you buy this game, or should you avoid it like the plague? So in Plague of Shadows, you learn that among the random knights that the Shovel Knight, Tim, wanted to beat up, there's a dude that's not respected by his peers. This unrespected individual is Plague Knight, but that's a bit of a lengthy name for him, don't you think? So we're gonna shorten it down a bit. We'll call him Jim for short. Jim joined up with a team known as the Order of No Nickel, after some of the world's famous adventurers had fallen from glory. But without the knowledge of his peers, Jim plans on stealing the essence held by his fellow knights so that he can brew some potion and get crunk. Honestly, I don't really like the story in this game much at all. The last game in the series had explored deeper meanings of the plot that Tim had to struggle with, such as the challenges of living under a reoccurring nightmare that crushed his mental stability. All Jim wants to do in Plague of Shadows is win over Bay. How unbelievably selfish he is. As for Plague of Shadows' presentation, I honestly was expecting much more. Although the Shovel Knight series is looking to be one of yearly releases, such as the Donkey Kong Country games that inspired it, there is very little effort in creating a product that looks visually distinct from its predecessor. Plague of Shadows uses the exact same graphical engine as Shovel Knight, which is a problem considering how outdated that game looked for 2014. Even with this in mind, the areas have not changed themes since the original game. You still have your obligatory castle level, graveyard level, and Castlevania Clock Tower level. It makes the game feel the exact same as Shovel Knight, and at times it feels like Plague of Shadows is an expansion pack as opposed to a new sequel. However, I had also initially played this game on Wii U, so then I switched over to playing on PC. Now this is a huge warning to the PC master race. The graphics and frame rate are not any better than that on consoles. As for the soundtrack, it was also missing a lot of originality. Most of the songs used in Plague of Shadows are from the original game. Now I'm all for a series reusing songs from previous entries to make the games feel more consistent, but virtually every song in Plague of Shadows is taken from Shovel Knight. Not remixed, not altered, all left completely the same. This is probably the game's biggest disappointment. Despite some of its faults, Plague of Shadows tries to differentiate itself from its predecessors on a gameplay level. The biggest difference is how Jim controls as opposed to Tim. Jim has the ability to jump a total of 3 times in the air, and can even attack in mid-jump for a bit more hang time. Not only does this mean Jim has more airborne potential than Tim, it also means that he can slam jam! The new movement is cool because it changes up the way that the levels can be played. At least it would be the case if the levels were actually different from the previous game. The developers at Yacht Club wanted to make a timeline of events that feel cohesive by having the game take place in the same world as Shovel Knight. But in doing so, they limit themselves to a world that is nearly the same. A sequel should expand upon the setting and characteristics of the previous game if it isn't using a new world to explore. Even the boss fights don't provide anything new to the table. Each one of them is exactly the same as before. There are a couple new bosses in the game that are added, such as the fight against Tim, but that's really all there is. All the random knights have the exact same attacks and patterns from the previous game. The same goes for the traveling warriors on the overworld. As fun as it was to fight characters such as Baz again, I feel like the inclusion ended up creating some notable ludonarrative dissonance. To make matters worse, the useful side weapons from the last game become obsolete. Not only do you have to go out of your way to find them, but when you do, the game tells you that they are useless. However, the jerkbag, Chester, from the last game, actually does take the weapons off your hands in exchange for some magic spells. But you have to wonder, does Chester know that the weapons he's getting are in fact useless? Is this why he developed his shady business practices? And if so, how is he able to act like such a jerk if this is in fact a sequel to Shovel Knight? Is Chester a time traveler? Because time travel never existed in NES games. That's just a myth. And among those issues, the game still has glitches that were not addressed since the original game. The money stations are back, but just like before, it's possible to forget to destroy them, which teleports you back to the nearest one upon death. But the same glitch occurs where some money stations can't be destroyed. I may not be a game designer, but these should be quick fixes, and the fact that they were not altered is inexcusable. So in the end, is Plague of Shadows worth it? Honestly, no it's not. Shovel Knight was a game with problems, but it showed a lot of potential for what a sequel could be. And now that we have the sequel, it's clear that this was just a lazy attempt to cash in on the mild success of the original game. Unless you can find Plague of Shadows on sale for free, or you find it in a bundle that includes both Shovel Knight and Plague of Shadows, you're honestly fine just skipping it entirely. If Yacht Club keeps making mediocre titles with the Shovel Knight franchise, I honestly don't see how they'll continue making games. That is why I give Plague of Shadows a 3 out of a dancing gym.